The Night Guard of Hollow Hall Museum Part 1. I thought I was hired to watch the museum. I didn't know it was watching me. Chapter 1. The Job Offer. They say the world runs on desperation. That might be true, because I only took the job because I was broke, not curious, not brave, and certainly not wise. Just broke. It came in an envelope, hand-delivered to my apartment door, though I never heard a knock. No return address, no stamp. Just my name, J. Calder, written in tight, old-fashioned cursive. Inside was a single piece of thick parchment paper, yellowed and textured like it had been torn from a book that shouldn't be opened. The text was typed, or printed to look like type, with black ink that had a strange shine to it when the light hit just right. To Mr. Calder. You are hereby offered provisional employment as night security officer for Hollow Hall Museum. Lodging provided. Immediate start. Arrival expected by dusk. Directions are included. Compensation generous. Do not bring anyone. Humbly. The curator. There was a map folded inside, hand-drawn in red ink. The location was a forested area 2 counties north, a spot where, to my knowledge, there was nothing but trees, farmland, and maybe one gas station that closed at sundown. But I was out of money. Rent was past due. And the job description was vague enough to be tempting. Night security meant quiet. Solitude. And the words, lodging provided, meant maybe I'd get a mattress and a roof for free. So I went. I packed only what fit in a duffel bag: toothbrush, boots, a flashlight, 2 changes of clothes, and a battery-powered radio. I didn't tell anyone. The letter said not to. And though that should have set off every internal alarm, it didn't. Instead, I felt called. Like the invitation was meant for me alone. I left that afternoon. As the city bled into countryside, then into dirt roads, I watched my phone signal vanish. The GPS gave up entirely, spinning in a lazy loop before freezing altogether. So I followed the map. The road narrowed. Trees closed in. Fog began to thread through the branches, even though the sky was still gray with daylight. It wasn't mist, it had weight. Like a blanket soaked in something old and metallic. After nearly 2 hours of winding forest, I saw it. Rising out of the trees was a black iron fence, twisted and tall, surrounding a building that didn't belong in this century. It was enormous, 3 stories, with a central dome and wings that stretched out like skeletal arms. Victorian, but decayed. The stone was moss-covered, with gargoyles on the corners that leaned too far forward, as if listening. No sign out front. No welcome plaque. Just a rusted gate hanging slightly ajar, and a path that led to heavy oak doors banded in bronze. This was Hollow Hall Museum. And it was waiting for me. The moment I stepped through the gate, the temperature dropped. Sharp, dry cold. The wind stopped completely, not a rustle of leaves, not a bird call. Just silence. The doors opened as I reached for the handle. From the inside, a tall woman stood in the entryway. Not a smile, not a greeting. Just a pair of crimson gloves folded in front of her and eyes that were pale gray and almost reflective. You are Jay, she said, as though correcting a mistaken assumption. Follow me. She led me through the museum's interior with long strides that didn't match her size. She was thin, stately, severe in posture, and made no effort to explain anything. The museum was strange. Dustless. Not clean, exactly, but perfectly undisturbed. Like it had never been touched by air or breath. The exhibits were dimly lit and encased in glass, skeletal remains, ritual masks, clockwork machines, and tapestries with scenes I couldn't identify, battles or hunts or something older. We passed doors that were bolted shut from the outside, corridors that were longer than they should have been, and a single hallway where every light flickered in perfect unison, like breath being held and released. Eventually, we stopped at a small room with a plain iron door. The word guard was stenciled in faded gold across it. This is your post, she said, handing me a ring of keys and a tarnished flashlight. Your route is circular. East Wing. North Hall. Clock Tower. Do not stray. And stay out of the West Wing. I turned to ask why, but she was already gone. I stood there for a long moment. The door shut behind me with a noise like a vault ceiling. I was alone. The guard room had a cot, a desk, a rusted lantern, and a logbook with only 2 names written in it. Thomas Y. 1951. Harold D. 1957. No end dates. No notes. I sat on the cot, listened to the silence press in, and waited for the chime of midnight. And though I wouldn't admit it then, not even to myself, I already felt it. The museum wasn't just full of history. It was history, and I wasn't guarding it. I was joining it. Chapter 2. Directions to Nowhere. By morning, I wasn't sure if I'd dreamt the night or lived it. The cot in the guard room was harder than concrete and reeked faintly of mothballs and rust. I hadn't slept much. The walls made too much sound for a building that old, groans like breath, soft thuds like footsteps muffled by thick carpets, and something that scratched once, just once, near the vent by the ceiling. I stepped out into the east hallway at dawn. Dust motes floated in the slanted amber light that leaked through narrow stained glass windows. The air smelled of old books and cedar smoke. But there were no lights, no heaters humming, no sound of a generator. Nothing mechanical. Just that breathless, humming silence. I planned to drive into town. I wanted to check in, make sure the museum was real, that my car could still leave, that this wasn't some beautifully orchestrated delusion. I hadn't seen any staff aside from the curator. No signs of administration. No clocks that worked. And something about those locked doors stayed with me. Especially the West Wing. The map I'd followed to get here still sat in my duffel bag. So I took it and made for the museum's front doors, past ancient cabinets of shrunken heads and glass jars filled with preserved feathers and small bones. That's when I noticed the gate. The front doors opened easily enough, and I stepped outside into cold gray daylight. But the road that had brought me here, the narrow dirt track, winding through the forest, was gone. In its place stood a high black iron fence circling the grounds, just as before, but now there was no gate. Where I'd entered, there was only uninterrupted wrought iron, tangled with creeping vines and dried, dead ivy. No tire tracks. No footprints. Just brittle grass leading back into a wall of trees. I stared for a long time. Then I walked the fence line. It circled perfectly. Seamless, as though it had always been closed. No gaps. No breaks. Not even rusted hinges to suggest a gate had ever existed. And then came the strangest part. I pulled out the map, hoping to retrace my steps manually. But the red ink had changed. The winding path that had once led through rural backroads now stopped short at the edge of a large ink blot. No details, just a thick, dark smudge, as if someone had bled the pen intentionally. My destination was circled still. Hollow Hall Museum, in looping calligraphy. But now the words beneath it had changed. Before, it had read, "Arrival expected by dusk." Now it read, "You have arrived. Remain within." I stood there, skin prickling beneath 3 layers of clothing, and stared at the ink as though it might move again. Then something did. A shape in the woods. Far off, between the trees. Not moving. Not human. Just tall. It stood with its arms at its sides, draped in something black. At this distance, it could have been a tree stump. But it wasn't there before. I was sure of it. My breath fogged in the air. The shape didn't move. Didn't blink. I folded the map slowly, backing toward the doors of the museum. 1 foot behind the other, careful not to trip. The hair on the back of my neck lifted. Then the shape tilted its head. Not far. Not fast. Just enough to let me know it saw me. Inside, I closed the doors hard enough to rattle the nearby glass displays. And something else rattled, too, upstairs, maybe. A picture frame? A case? I waited, ears straining, but the museum went silent again. Just like before. I returned to the guard room, locked the door, and took out the journal I'd found the night before. The one left behind by a former guard. I flipped past the first few entries, mostly mundane stuff. Descriptions of rounds. Odd notes about missing keys, lights flickering, the West Wing being wrong. But the last page had changed. Last night, it had ended with a single line. It saw me. It knows. Now it said, "You've seen it too. You should not have looked." The ink was still damp. I didn't leave the guard room for hours after that. I couldn't. Outside, somewhere in the forest, something tall still watched. Inside, the museum shifted when I wasn't looking. Paintings moved. Doors I hadn't noticed before stood open and waiting. I was inside, and now I was starting to understand what that meant. Chapter 3. The Curator in Red. That evening, the museum grew darker earlier than it should have. The sky outside the stained glass turned an unnatural shade of purple-gray. It wasn't just twilight, this was something heavier, more deliberate. Like night falling with purpose. I had managed, through sheer stubbornness, to convince myself I'd imagined the figure in the woods. That the journal's changing entry was a coincidence, maybe a second page, a trick of tired eyes. But when the museum lights buzzed to life on their own at 6 p.m., I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed into something I couldn't walk back from. At exactly 6:13, the brass telephone in the guardroom rang. I hadn't noticed it before. It sat on a narrow side table beside the cot, rotary dial, the cord frayed and taut, as if it hadn't been used in decades. The ringer was shrill and hollow, like metal scraped against porcelain. I hesitated before answering. When I lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone, just a single voice. The route begins now. Do not deviate. Then the click of disconnection. It was her voice. The curator. I hadn't seen her since the night before. But when I stepped into the main hall to begin my patrol, she was there, waiting at the top of the grand staircase, just as silent, just as statuesque. Her crimson gloves gleamed even in the dim light, and the folds of her long black coat didn't move with her steps, as though the air didn't dare touch her. She descended slowly. Every step she took echoed longer than it should have, like the sound been around her presence. When she reached the marble floor, she didn't speak right away. She just looked at me. Not into me, but past me, like there was something behind me she found more interesting. I trust you've reviewed the map, she said at last. I nodded. I didn't mention the ink had changed. I didn't ask who or what stood in the woods. She walked past me without another word and gestured for me to follow. This is a museum of memory, she said, her voice even and cold. What is remembered is kept. What is forgotten decays. Your duty is not protection. It is containment. Her heels clicked down a side corridor I hadn't explored yet, the walls narrowing into stone archways chiseled with unfamiliar symbols. The exhibits here were stranger, more abstract. A display case of teeth, sorted by size and apparent age. A taxidermied owl with no face. A chair with straps and a thick leather-bound book bolted to its seat. She paused in front of a tall set of iron double doors. Their surface was scratched and darkened, as though something had tried to get out. This, she said, is the West Wing. I turned to her. Why am I not allowed inside? She looked at me with something like pity. Maybe regret. Because it no longer remembers you. That made no sense. I almost asked for clarity, but she was already walking again, fast now, her pace long and stiff. We made our way to the North Hall, where older exhibits filled the gallery like ghosts. There was a series of portraits, each dated by century. The first set from the 1500s, all in oil, all faded. Then the 1700s. Then the 1800s. I stopped in front of a large one that caught my eye. A man with graying hair and hollow eyes, wearing a uniform much like mine, stood stiffly in front of a glass case. The frame read, Mystery, Wren, Night Guard, 1894. Lost to reflection. Lost to reflection? I asked. The curator didn't answer. She led me back to the East Wing, the one she had said I was allowed to patrol, and pointed to the security route drawn on the museum's map, mounted beside the entryway. It was simple, the East Corridor, the North Hall, the tower stairs, and the foyer. Nothing else. Deviation is breach, she said. Breach invites memory loss. Memory loss leads to decay. Do you understand? I nodded. But I didn't. Not yet. She stared at me a moment longer, then reached into her coat and pulled something small and wrapped in velvet. A key. Dark silver, almost black. She placed it in my palm and folded my fingers over it. You will know when to use it. Until then, she paused, eyes scanning the hall as though listening to something I couldn't hear. Stay in your loop. Then she walked away, her red gloves vanishing around the corner. I stood alone again. The silence closed in fast, like curtains drawing tight. But something she said still looped in my mind. It no longer remembers you. Not you don't remember it. Not you've never been there. But it no longer remembers me. As if, at some point, I had already been inside. Chapter 4. First Night's Silence. I began my first full patrol just after 8 p.m. The museum's silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive, like a glass dome had been lowered over the building, sealing it off from the rest of the world. Even my footsteps felt wrong. Too soft. Too slow. As if the marble underfoot had been trained not to echo back. I started with the East Wing, just as the curator instructed. My flashlight was heavy, industrial, probably older than I was. The beam was a narrow tunnel of light, illuminating just enough to feel unsafe. The exhibits along this hall were peculiar. Not overtly frightening, just odd in ways that pressed unease deep into my chest. The first room held instruments, musical and medical. One display featured a harp strung with hair, human, judging by the fraying ends. Another case contained a surgeon's kit etched with prayers in Latin. Next to it sat a human skull with the top cut cleanly off and an inscription carved inside the dome. The soul resides here. The longer I walked, the less convinced I was that the halls were staying still. The temperature changed from room to room. Slight differences. A shift in air pressure. Lights dimming by fractions. It felt as though the museum breathed in time with my footsteps, exhaling softly every few minutes, its walls sighing with age and something more. I passed a collection of antique clocks, all frozen at different times. 12:03, 1:17, 3:33. None ticked. But when I shined my flashlight at them, their minute hands had moved. Just slightly. Only one tick forward. The plaque below them read, "Moments we cannot return to." I continued down the north corridor. Here the floor changed, less marble, more wood. Old boards that creaked underfoot, though softly, like reluctant complaints. The portraits on the walls grew more detailed in this wing. Less stylized, more realistic. Some were so vivid I instinctively avoided eye contact. The longer I stared, the more I could feel their gazes returning. One portrait in particular made me stop. It was a woman in a high-collared dress, standing in a garden of withered trees. Her hands were red, though I couldn't tell if they were gloved or stained. Her smile was small and tight, more restraint than joy. There was no plaque beneath her. No frame label. Nothing. I moved on. At the end of the corridor was a heavy oak door with a brass knob. Beyond it, the spiral staircase to the clock tower. The curator had marked it on the route as part of the patrol, though I wondered who or what could possibly be up there to guard. The stairs groaned as I ascended, each one slightly warped by time. No windows. Only that circular stone wall coiling upward like the inside of a shell. I kept the flashlight angled ahead. Halfway up, I passed a small alcove in the wall, an old maintenance niche with dust-covered tools. A coiled rope. A lantern. There was a smell here, too. Not quite decay. More like old breath. Like the space had held something living once and never forgot. At the top, I reached a door marked Mechanism Access. I tried the handle. Locked. I didn't push further. Instead, I stood in the cold chamber just beneath the face of the museum's massive clock. The gears above groaned quietly in the shadows. They weren't moving. The hands on the outer glass showed 11:47 p.m. I checked my own watch. 11:47. The same. But it didn't feel like time had passed. Not enough of it. I felt as though I had just started my rounds, and yet nearly 4 hours had ticked by. I descended quickly, heart beginning to race. I wanted the patrol to be over. I wanted the dawn to come. I wanted. A sound stopped me halfway down the stairs. Not loud. Just off. Like fabric dragging slowly across stone. A rustle. From below. I froze, clutching the railing. The air had thickened, suddenly humid, like breath before thunder. I aimed my flashlight downward, but the beam was weak now. Flickering slightly. The stairs below were still, but the sound persisted. Rustle. Drag. Stop. Then something else. A sharp tap, like metal on wood. Another tap. And then laughter. Not from a child. Not from anything living. It was a crackling, high-pitched wheeze, like something imitating a laugh badly. A breathless mockery of joy. It faded almost as quickly as it came. I didn't move. I waited 5 minutes before descending the rest of the way. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I didn't see anyone. Nothing moved in the hall. The laughter had stopped. Only the stillness remained, waiting for me, perhaps, to dare dismiss what I'd heard. By the time I returned to the main foyer, it was past midnight. I knew it not because of my watch, but because the grandfather clock had started ticking. I hadn't noticed it before. It stood just beside the main staircase, carved from blackened wood, its face faded to a cloudy ivory. The second hand moved in smooth, unnatural motion, no ticking, just gliding. I waited. It struck midnight. 1 chime. 2. 3. I counted. 4. 5. 6. Each chime deeper than the last. Resonating not just in the air, but in the museum's very bones. 7. 8. 9. I clutched my flashlight tighter. My vision blurred. My ears rang. 10. 11. 12. Then 13. The final chime cracked the air like a rift. Then Silence. No echo. No hum. Just a stillness so total it felt like the museum itself had stopped breathing. I stood there for a long time in that thick, hollow silence. And something clicked inside me, not logic, not memory. Instinct. I wasn't here to protect the museum. I was here to obey it, to walk its halls, to play the part, and most importantly, to stay inside the loop. Chapter 5. The Gallery That Wasn't There. By my second night, I understood that Hollow Hall didn't operate by ordinary rules. It wasn't just a building. It was a shape in time, a creature that wore history like skin, shifting it, shedding it, replacing it without warning. The map was useless now. Not just inaccurate, but actively misleading. Corridors twisted in ways they hadn't the night before. Rooms stretched longer. The light in one hall turned green for no reason. Even the smell of the air changed depending on where I stood. But I stuck to the route. East Wing, North Hall, Clock Tower, Foyer. Do not stray. The curator's voice, low and final, lived in my mind like a second heartbeat. It happened just past 2 a.m. I completed my third circuit of the East Wing and stopped to rest in a narrow corridor lined with display cases. It was one of the less disturbing sections, mostly relics and trinkets. Coins, old tools, mariner's charts. I sat on a small bench carved from dark wood and flipped through the journal I'd found that first night, the one left behind by the guard from 1957. Some pages had been scribbled through violently. Others were stuck together with what looked like wax or old glue. I turned to the latest readable entry and found a single line. The gallery moves when you blink. I read it 3 times. Then something made me look up. There was a hallway where, last night, there had been only a blank wall. No sound. No motion. Just new architecture, where none had been. I rose from the bench slowly, heart pacing unevenly, flashlight in hand. The corridor was narrow and high-ceilinged, with walls of black painted plaster and a carpet that swallowed sound. The light fixtures were low gas sconces that flickered, though I'd never seen flame-powered lighting anywhere else in the museum. The plaque at the entrance said only, Gallery 9, The Living Collection. I checked the route map again. This hall wasn't listed. Not even hinted at. Not East Wing. Not North Hall. Nothing. My first instinct was to walk away. My second told me to go forward. Inside, the gallery was hushed in an unnatural way. Not empty, expectant. The exhibits were laid out in glass cases just like the rest of the museum, but these were different. Each contained a single item placed at perfect center. A top hat. A lace glove. A cracked tea saucer. A child's boot, laced tightly and worn. No labels. No dates. Just objects. But it wasn't the exhibits themselves that unsettled me, it was the way they were arranged. Each case was exactly eye level. Exactly the same distance apart. And behind each one stood a full-length mirror, slightly warped. I approached one. Inside the glass case was a single, yellowed photograph of a man. Head bowed. Hands clasped behind his back. As I stepped closer, I caught a flicker of movement in the mirror behind it. I froze. My own reflection stood still, but the man in the photo now raised his head. In the mirror. Not in the frame. Only in the warped glass. His face was blurred, but he seemed to be smiling. I backed away, keeping my flashlight pointed low. The beam trembled slightly. I wasn't sure if it was my hand or the light itself. I glanced over my shoulder to reassure myself I could find my way back to the main hall. But the entrance was gone. Just another wall now. Seamless. And the gallery had changed behind me. The next exhibit had not been there before. Inside the new case was something familiar. A pair of boots. My boots. Stained at the soles. Laces frayed. I looked down. My own boots were clean, new. I had bought them only days ago. But the ones in the glass case, those were mine after years of wear. As if they'd been worn through some future I hadn't lived yet. Behind them, the mirror no longer showed my reflection at all. It showed the hallway behind me, but not as it was now. It was dark and empty and filled with glass coffins. One of them had my name etched in gold. I turned in place. Slowly. The actual hallway remained unchanged. No coffins. No boots. Just shadows and velvet ropes and quiet. But I was no longer sure which direction was forward and which direction was real. My radio crackled. It hadn't worked until now. Static broke through first, then a voice. Not the curator. A man's voice. Faint. Desperate. Don't. Take the key. More static. Mirror lies, but the name is real. Then silence. The flashlight dimmed further. I tapped it once. The beam returned in a sudden burst and revealed the final display. My own name, etched in brass on a pedestal beneath a glass case. There was nothing inside. No object. No relic. Just an empty space, shaped like a standing man. Behind it, the mirror shimmered. My reflection no longer stood in front of the case. It was inside it. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the rules or the route. I turned corners that shouldn't exist, past doors that were never there. Eventually, breath ragged, heart stuttering like a faulty engine, I stumbled into the foyer. The grandfather clock stood still. I collapsed onto the floor beside the bench where I'd sat hours ago. The corridor to Gallery 9 was gone. Just a blank wall. And in my hand, clenched so tightly it left marks, was a new brass key, shaped like a question mark. No tag. No origin. No explanation. Chapter 6. The Journal of a Previous Guard. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the guard room, the museum breathing quietly around me, while I stared at the brass key that had appeared in my hand. Its shape was unnatural, curved like a question mark, its teeth asymmetrical and jagged. It didn't match any lock I'd seen. The curator hadn't returned. She hadn't appeared at all that night. No sound from the upper halls. No movement on the staircase. Just me, the key, and a silence so thick it felt like the building was watching me hold something I wasn't meant to. I thought of Gallery 9, the mirror reflections, the boots, the case with my name, and nothing inside. No one would believe me. But the museum would. The museum never forgot. Sometime around 4 a.m., I picked up the journal again. It hadn't changed since the previous night, at least not visibly. No new entries appeared in fresh ink. But when I opened to the middle, somewhere I hadn't yet looked, I found several pages written in tight, frantic handwriting. Denser. Harsher. As though whoever wrote them had lost patience or sanity. The handwriting belonged to Harold D., the last name listed in the logbook. His first entries were orderly, methodical. Patrol logs. Descriptions of strange sounds. An odd guest or two. A mention of the curator who, even then, did not give her name. But then, about 2 weeks in, his tone shifted. The museum changes at night. Not just the layout. The exhibits. They move. I recorded the positions of the statues in the eastern corridor last night. Tonight, 3 have turned their heads. One now faces the wall. That was familiar. I had passed those same statues. I remembered the one that looked away. I kept reading. I've seen people in the mirrors. Not myself. Others. They wave. Sometimes, they scream silently. I followed a sound of the West Wing once. Didn't go in. The door was unlocked. I heard whispering inside, names spoken in reverse. I paused. Flipped back to check. In my first night, the West Wing was locked. But according to Harold, it hadn't always been. The entries grew more erratic. The clocks don't tell time. They tell memory. When they tick, something is lost. I forgot my sister's face today. Yesterday, I forgot I had a sister at all. That line chilled me. I tried to picture my own family. My mother's voice. My father's hands. My brother's laugh. But all of it came slowly, as if through fog. As though I had to remember how to remember. Was it the museum? Was it me? Or had I simply stayed here one night too long? Then, I found the entry. A single, standalone page with no date, written in shaking, all-caps lettering. Do not look into the case that says your name. Do not write anything in the journal. The building is listening. If it reads you, IT writes you. My fingers tightened around the page. I flipped back to the beginning, looking for the first mention of a journal, hoping for instructions, maybe a way out. What I found instead was something I hadn't noticed before. In the inside front cover, written in faint pencil beneath the name Harold D., was a note. If you are reading this, then you are next. We are hired. But we were never employed. There is no paycheck. No exit. The curator isn't who you think she is. She's not even the first one. You are not a guard. You are an exhibit waiting to be placed. I dropped the journal. It hit the floor with a soft thud, then flopped open on its own. Pages fluttered, stopped, and lay still. There was a new entry. The ink was fresh, still wet. It read, J. Calder, Gallery 9. Scheduled for placement. Awaiting memory completion. I backed away, heart thudding so hard I thought it would tear from my ribs. The journal wasn't just recording the past, it was writing the future. My future. The only question left was, who was writing it? And when would they come to collect? Chapter 7. Midnight Ringing. It was the third night. By then, I'd learned not to fight the museum's rules, only to understand them. Not to speak too loudly. Not to stare too long. And above all, not to trust silence. Because here, silence meant listening. And something always listened. The day passed like smoke. I don't remember sleeping. I don't remember eating. I only remember the stillness. How it weighed heavier now, like the museum was slowly lowering its ribs around me. A sarcophagus made of stone and time and memory. I stayed in the guard room until the light outside faded from gray to violet. No phone. No service. The only clock I could trust, if trust was even the right word, was the grandfather clock in the foyer. And as the hands approached midnight, I felt it again, the pressure, like a great breath being drawn through the walls. Waiting. Preparing. I left the guard room at 11:55 p.m., flashlight in hand, boots soft against the marble tiles. The halls had changed. Subtly. Angles slightly off. Paintings closer to the ground. A new statue near the east arch, a veiled woman with a bird's skull in her lap. I hadn't seen it before. I wasn't sure if I'd ever seen the same museum twice. I passed the portraits in the north corridor. Their eyes followed me again, but not all at once. One would turn as I walked past. Another would narrow. One blinked. I was sure it blinked. But I didn't stop. Because the clock was about to ring. I arrived in the foyer at 11:59. The grandfather clock loomed taller than I remembered, its surface cracked like aging skin. The pendulum inside had begun to sway, slow and steady, groaning slightly with each arc. I watched as the minute hand trembled forward. Midnight. The first chime was dull, almost distant, like it had to crawl up through the foundation of the museum. The second echoed louder. Then the third. By the seventh, my chest ached with the vibrations. The walls shuddered slightly. The light dimmed. At 12, I held my breath. At 13, the diary buzzed. It was inside my coat pocket, where I had kept it since the night before. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. The leather cover was cold, too cold, and slick with something damp. The pages fluttered on their own until one near the middle cracked open, curling like petals to reveal fresh ink. The entry was short, just 5 words. He will come. J. Calder. My breath left me in a hard exhale. Not just J. Calder. My full name. The ink was still wet. I looked around the foyer, heart pounding hard enough to make my fingers tremble. I was alone. Visibly. But that no longer meant anything here. My flashlight flickered once. Then again. And then, I heard it. A soft ring. Not the clock. Not the phone. Something else. It was delicate, faint, like a bell on a string, swaying somewhere far down a hallway I hadn't noticed before. It rang once. Twice. Then silence. My ears strained to find its source, but the sound was directionless. Like it had no point of origin, only a destination. Me. I opened the journal again. A new line had appeared beneath the last. J. Calder. Seen. Heard. Understood. And below that, in smaller print, like a whisper across the page. Do not follow the bell. I stood paralyzed for several minutes. The museum had never addressed me before. Not like this. Never with specificity. Never with such cold precision. But now, it knew my name. Not just that I was here. It knew who I was. Somewhere far off, the bell rang again. Closer this time. A shiver crawled up my spine. I backed away slowly, toward the East Hall, where the exhibits were quieter, older, less aware. But before I could leave the foyer, I noticed something on the wall to the right of the clock. A new plaque. Brass. Freshly polished. Gleaming. It hadn't been there before. It read, J. Calder, 2023. No death date. Just my name. And beneath it, awaiting placement. Chapter 8. The exhibit that spoke. I returned to the patrol route the following night with a new rule of my own. No stopping. No staring. No listening. Because the museum wanted me to listen. It throbbed with silence in a way that demanded it, stretching the quiet into whispers, the shadows into gestures. And it always started small. Tonight, I began in the North Hall, flashlight in hand, boots echoing softly against the parquet floor. The paintings here were familiar now. Dozens of them, all arranged in symmetrical rows down a hallway too long for the building's exterior to explain. They were all portraits. Different centuries. Different mediums. But they shared a sameness and expression, like each subject was painted just as they were about to speak. Lips slightly parted. Eyes widened a touch too much. But tonight, something was wrong. The air moved. Only slightly. A soft shift, as if someone nearby had sighed. I stopped walking. Held my breath. There it was again. A whisper. Just barely above thought. Jay. I turned, flashlight beam sweeping over gilt frames and oil faces. No movement. Just canvas and stillness. Jay. It was coming from the Hall of Portraits. The central chamber at the end of the corridor. I hadn't planned to enter, it wasn't on my patrol tonight, but my feet moved without permission. Something in the air had grown warm. Thick. Like standing too close to breath on glass. The Hall of Portraits was a circular room, domed high above with blackened glass. Dozens, no, hundreds, of paintings adorned the curved walls, arranged from floor to ceiling in a dizzying spiral. It felt like stepping into a hive made of memory. As I entered, I heard it again. A soft whisper, curling through the air like smoke. Then another. And another. It wasn't a voice. It was dozens. Muffled. Layered. Overlapping like tangled threads. I turned slowly, flashlight sweeping across the paintings. The beam passed over faces frozen in expression, some fearful, some blank, some mid-laughter. Then I saw it. At the far end of the room, slightly larger than the others, hung a portrait of a smiling man. His face was bright, eyes clear, the grin stretched just slightly too wide to be natural. Not mocking, not joyful, just fixed. The nameplate beneath him was polished and unmarred. I crouched down to read it. Subject unknown, acquired 1912. That's all. No title. No artist. No backstory. And as I leaned closer, I heard something that shouldn't have been possible. He exhaled. Not loudly. Just a breath. A subtle push of air, as though the man in the painting had sighed in his sleep. I froze. My skin broke out in a cold sweat. The air was moving toward me, warm, stale, human. The flashlight flickered. His smile twitched. I swear it. Just slightly. The muscles at the corners of his mouth pulled upward by a fraction. My breath caught. I stepped back, but the air had grown thicker now, moist. A low hum rose behind the whispering, like static trapped in wood. Jay. The voice was clearer now. And it was his. I did the only thing that felt right. I turned and walked out, fast, head down, light steady, eyes focused on the edge of the doorway. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I didn't give the museum that satisfaction. But the voice followed me all the way down the corridor. Jay. 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 Each repetition was fainter. Not weaker. Just further away. Like it wasn't following me through the hallway. It was following me through time. Back in the guard room, I locked the door. The journal lay on the desk. Closed. Waiting. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to know what new words had appeared. But I had to look. I opened it to the newest page. Just one sentence, written in wide, looping ink. He has seen you. And beneath it, scratched faintly in the margin. Smiling is the first sign. The story may end here. But the darkness never sleeps. Like this video to keep the shadows stirring. Share your whispers in the comments. Your voice shapes the next nightmare. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Gothic Hour Stories and Mysteries. Where every tale lingers, and every soul leaves a mark, the Gothic Hour awaits.